The Conservative Party of Canada is at a crossroads. Will the party embrace populism and capitalize on the broad frustrations that many Canadians have with the Trudeau government, or will they go down the safe establishment path and formula of presenting themselves as a more disciplined and more moderate version of the Liberal Party of Canada? I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. So there's a couple of things that we know, and that is that Canadians are feeling the effects of a big government led by the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau. They always think that they know best. This style of government includes the astronomical debt that Trudeau has raked up, a bureaucratic busybodies constantly getting in the way of jobs and growth, a growing nanny state where the government restricts our rights and freedoms at every turn, and all the while, it seems like Justin Trudeau is never really held accountable. He always finds a way to get away and give himself more power, whether it's through backroom deals like the one we saw with Jagmeet Singh, or just utilizing the various tools of government to get away with his various scandals. So many Canadians are left wondering, what is the alternative? Could there be an opportunity here for the Conservative Party of Canada? Do Conservatives embrace populism, or do they look down their noses at it like so many in the establishment class do? Well, my guest today on the Candice Malcolm Show is Ben Woodfinden. Ben is a writer and contributor to the National Post and to Hub. The Hub, his recent article, he argues that it's time for the Conservatives to embrace populism. Ben is also working on a PhD over at McGill University, and it is great to have you on the program, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So I've never had you on the show before, but I have been reading and enjoying your work in various publications for a long time. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in sort of public policy and writing in various newspapers?
Sure. So as you said, I'm finishing a PhD right now at McGill. Doing a PhD is kind of, I won't bore your listeners with the details, but basically on executive power in the Westminster system is the really boring version of it. So I do that, it's kind of like my day job, so to speak. But I do a fair bit of, I never really know what to describe myself as exactly. I do some writing, commentary on the side. I write pretty regularly, places like the National Post. And what's people always assume I kind of have a kind of a hyper-partisan background, and I really don't. I've actually never formally worked for the Conservative Party or anything like that. I kind of see my role in the kind of the movement more broadly in that kind of more small C sense. I don't hide my political leanings. People in the academic world certainly are aware of my political leanings, unfortunately sometimes. But I kind of see myself as a kind of small C voice that tries to kind of offer nudges and prompts and kind of the way on directions I think the party should take. I don't really know if there's a kind of I would just call myself a conservative. I don't know if there's a kind of type of conservative I would necessarily kind of frame myself as. I do kind of some of the kind of broader shifts we've seen in the last couple of years, not just in Canada, but in the US and the UK, towards a kind of more what I like to call kind of like a blue collar conservatism. I think I'm very kind of sympathetic towards that, and I kind of think that's happening whether people like it or not. That's the direction it's going anyway. But I also think it's a good thing that we're going in that direction, and kind of some of the work Conservatives need to be doing over the next few years is kind of figuring out how to kind of how to put meat on those bones, and how to kind of really flesh some kind of good policy ideas and kind of a good substantive agenda around that kind of shift as well.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about the need to sort of embrace working class values and populism. I don't really expect that talking to an academic from McGill University. So I do wonder what brought you towards conservatism. It's sort of rare, like you mentioned, in academia and in just sort of elite establishments like the one that you work at. So I'm just curious as to you were reluctant to say what kind of conservative you are, but what brought you to this tradition of conservatism?
Good question. I was born in the UK, and I grew up in the UK, and my family moved to Canada when I was about 15. Moving countries when you're 15 it's not an easy time necessarily to move. So I had a kind of strange high school experience when I was here. And I basically, I wouldn't have called myself I wasn't interested in politics or anything like that when I was young. I basically just kind of had more time on my hands and doing a bit more reading, a bit more thinking when we moved here. And of course, I would say this, as someone doing a PhD, but I basically just kind of read my way into it. I did the kind of the very unique, maybe strange thing of I grew up in a fairly non-religious family, and I became a Catholic. I converted when I was about 21. I was an undergrad, so there was definitely, and some of that was definitely, it wasn't a political move, but it was definitely broader. I'm fairly traditionalist in many ways, and so there's definitely something going on there. In terms of my kind of political evolution, I think, so like I said, I grew up in the UK, and I think prior to that, my politics were kind of quite. I was always kind of conservative, but I was never super comfortable with maybe some of the more like free markety kind of conservatism. But I kind of just went, I didn't really think about there being other ways to think about conservatism until Brexit. And Brexit really kind of changed, but really opened my eyes to certain things. So the kinds of, I come from a fairly working class background in the UK. So much of the kind of the discourse, the kind of discussion around Brexit that, before and then after the referendum, certain things really change. Some things really changed for me and opened my eyes. And the kind of so I guess if there's one kind of broad thing that I changed my mind on that really does shape my politics now, it's the kind of the way that the traditional defenders of the working class, people on the left, the way that they now think about politics and the way that they now think about defending the interests of working class people is just totally divorced from the real lives of these people. I sometimes get fairly or unfairly, I think fairly kind of labeled as kind of a pro-union conservative. And I always like to clarify with people that I'm very pro kind of labor unions and actual like trade unions, but I'm not particularly pro public sector unions, which are a totally different animal just in terms of the incentives that motivate them, the kinds of people that are actually members of if you're in a public sector union, you're basically a member of like the professional class, right? And so I think like the Labour Party in the UK now, it's still, a union party, but it's dominated by like public sector unions. So the kind of Labour politics that they're into now is very much that kind of like professional, managerial, kind of urban, London-based kind of politics. And also, while all these kind of bigger shifts were going on around Brexit and stuff like that, it just kind of so many new things just kind of became clear to me that I don't want to say that I kind of found my own like consciousness. I really like that kind of language, but I think kind of over these last couple of years, I've kind of come into my own kind of sense of where I'm from, how it fits into the world, and so when I say I'm sympathetic to these kind of like blue collar conservative shifts, I partially kind of like self-motivated. That's kind of broadly speaking how I kind of see my background and see where I'm from. So. Yeah, and some of this is economic stuff. Some of this obviously overlaps with like deeper kind of cultural questions about respect and dignity for people. But yeah, I think so. It's a long way of kind of explaining how I got here. But if there was a single kind of catalyst for my kind of shift in politics, it was probably Brexit and what happened in the years following that.
It's so interesting. I could do a whole show, and I probably should one day, on the number of conservatives that I know who have converted to Catholicism just personally, either from like an atheist background or maybe just like a Anglican Christian sort of background, where they sort of feel the need to go towards something even more traditional and more steeped in the actual teachings of the Bible and not just sort of the latest politics around them all. But we'll save that for another day. It's interesting that you mentioned the distinction between public sector unions and private sector unions, because I feel like this is a conflict for the NDP. I mean, we saw the big merger or the agreement or the coalition, the Pact between Trudeau and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. And, right in their priorities, it talked about unions. But you could tell that they were talking about public sector unions, because they're talking about sick days and perks. Like it wasn't so much we're going to fight for the interests of the working man. It was more like we're going to fight for the entitlements of the government class and the managerial class. And it's a good segue, because I know you wrote this great essay over in The Hub where you talked about how Pierre Poilievre, or whoever is going to lead the next Conservative Party, there's a sort of winning strategy baked into a speech that Pierre Poilievre gave about the elite gatekeepers. And so I'm hoping you can sort of expand on that a little bit. What do you mean by elite gatekeepers, or what did Pierre Poilievre mean by them? And how is this a winning strategy for Conservatives?
Sure. So when I wrote that essay, I had in mind. So Poilievre gave a speech on the floor of the House of Commons sometime. I think it was last spring. I have to go look, but he called the speech "The Gatekeepers." And Poilievre has this kind of he has a very distinct kind of style, right? He's kind of mastered his own approach. And it was a very kind of Poilievre-ish speech where he went after, basically, he starts going after kind of NIMBYs that basically blocked an expansion of Billy Bishop, so the airport in downtown Toronto. And he basically uses it to show basically how kind of all sorts of different these elite gatekeepers are basically kind of holding back ordinary Canadians. And it's not it's a very kind of, in many ways it's a very kind of it's not a very dangerous or like dark speech. I think some people, they hear the word populism, they think, this kind of evil, scary, demonizing rhetoric. But the kind of populism he was kind of channeling there, I think, is a very kind of healthy populism. And his argument is, he's making essentially kind of an economic argument, right? You have these ordinary Canadians who are being held back by these various kind of bureaucratic, not always bureaucratic, but whether it's kind of big corporate interests or big government interests, or the wedding of the two, which happens so often. It's how these kinds of people are, preventing. He looks at things like housing is the most obvious one. And I think, and so my arguments in the piece, but there's some real potential for this kind of message, for him to kind of simultaneously kind of be authentically himself. He doesn't have to pretend to be something he isn't, which, I think that was as I said in the essay, that if there was one lesson to take from Erin O'Toole's leadership, it's that you can't run, you can try that pivot, that run as one thing for leader and then try and pivot towards something else. It's unlikely to work, right? Because you kind of stuck caught between a rock and a hard place once you do. O'Toole did this. O'Toole was still kind of, during the election was still attacked as being kind of like far right, which is, it's farcical to think about. But he simultaneously, some of those attacks would stick precisely because, there were clips of him that they could use that the Liberals could use to try and make him out to be one thing. But then precisely because he wasn't like that, and precisely because he pivoted to this completely, done a complete 180, O'Toole, he basically lost trust with the base, right, with the people that elected him, and so he had what was, you could basically describe as an authenticity problem by the end of it. If Poilievre was to run on this kind of thing, I don't think he has that problem, precisely because he can. I think this kind of message is appealing to enough of the kind of conservative base that will still, resonate with the base. But where I really think there's kind of potential for this kind of message is it really has growth potential beyond just kind of traditional Tory voters. One thing that I don't want to tease it too much in here, but I'm working on another piece right now that I'm hoping to expand on this point a bit. But the kinds of if he goes for this kind of this anti-gatekeepers coalition that I'm kind of suggesting he should, it's in some sense it's a populist movement, a populist coalition. But the people I think he should target aren't necessarily what you might think of as kind of the traditional populist voters, right? When we think about places like the UK and the US, we're thinking about kind of like Rust Belt, maybe rural, like older people, that these are the kind of prime populist voters. And I'm actually not so sure that that's the people he should be targeting with this message so much. I think the kind of people that will be most open to what he's saying are quite likely to be younger Canadians. It's quite likely to be a fairly kind of diverse, like ethnically quite a diverse set of people. I'm thinking kind of like the Four Nation kind of coalition. These are people, they're younger. They're struggling. The cost of living is kind of threatening to swamp them. They can't buy a house. They've been priced out of the housing market. They get told by boomers that wealthy to do boomers that if you can't afford gas on your car, just buy an electric vehicle, as if it's that easy. These are the kind of people I think Poilievre could really resonate with. And so it's not necessarily, it's a fairly, you might want to call it like not an unorthodox coalition. But I think it's one that has real potential, kind of real formidable electoral potential for him, and one that, especially where you think about some of these voters live, places like the GTA and the 905, if he could find a way to successfully kind of mobilize his coalition, it could propel him to government, and a big kind of resounding government. So it's not necessarily, it would be easier. It's going to be, if Poilievre wins, he's going to get painted as the next Trump, the next Johnson. And so many of these comparisons are so silly when they're made by like media and people like that. But in many ways, I think if people try and do that to him, they're really going to kind of miss what's going on. They might be quite shocked. They might wake up in 2025, whenever the next election is going to be now, and discover that kind of a coalition of people that they really weren't expecting might propel them to victory.
One of the interesting things that came out of the trucker convoy, I saw a poll that showed that the people who were the most sympathetic to the cause of the truckers were young Canadians, people under the age of 30. Which seems a little counterintuitive, but I think that the way that you draw out that sort of coalition of people who, I mean, if you think about the last 2 years and what we've lost, it's hard for all of us. But I think that the people that were hit the hardest are those who are in school, who are young, who are out there, looking to live a life and get experiences and make friends and date and all this kind of stuff. And so much of that was restricted that I don't think we've really properly calibrated just how much anger and resentment there is among that group of people. I want to chat a little bit more about this aspect that you're talking about with Erin O'Toole and the authenticity issue. I completely agree with your analysis, and I think that was certainly one of his many, many problems. It seems like the sort of tried and true strategy for conservatives is to appeal to the base, provide the red meat during the selection period where they're picking a new leader, and then sort of moderate and appeal more to centrist voters during the general election. It didn't work for Andrew Scheer. It didn't work for Erin O'Toole. Do you think conservatives will learn this lesson? Do you think that they will select a leader based on this, or do you think that they're doomed to continue to make this mistake?
I think they're going to. I don't know if they're going to learn all the right lessons, but I think I would. It's still we're recording this in March, so who knows what's going to happen in the next 6 months. But I still think this race is very much Poilievre's to lose. I'd still be quite surprised if anyone else wins. I do have to. It is quite. It's quite funny watching some of the media coverage of the race from non-conservatives, the people who they think there's nothing more. I find that amusing, but also quite frustrating to get kind of this is who the Conservatives should pick from people that are never ever going to vote Conservative, right? And I always think it's kind of like it's atheists giving advice to the church, right? Like, well, I'm never ever, I don't believe in God, and I'm never ever going to go to church. But if only the Catholic Church would become a bit more liberal on all these things, well, I'd never become Catholic, but maybe I would just, maybe I respect the church a bit more. And so much of that advice feels like that to me. You're getting, it doesn't mean you shouldn't. It just doesn't mean the Conservatives should only listen to conservatives. I'm not saying they shouldn't take outside advice. But they should be very careful in some senses who they take that advice from. People that want a conservative party, lots of these people that want the kind of the kind of liberal light candidate, they might they think that is the kind of they'll frame their arguments as like, this is what the Conservatives need to do to win. But what they really mean is, this is what the Conservatives need to do so that they can be an opposition that I like a bit more, right? And I think they have to avoid that kind of, be very wary of that kind of advice. And I do think this time around, I get the sense that the base in general is quite sick of, is quite wary of that. They're quite sick of that. Where I do think the Conservatives need to learn, where I think they need to do some real thinking, where I think they need to kind of do some serious kind of work and thinking for themselves is, we treat people in different parts of the country as kind of the same. If you're an Albertan, you must be this way. If you're a Quebecer, you must be this way. If you're rural, you must be this way. If you're urban, you must be this way. And I think that it's such a kind of simplistic way of looking at it. One of the things I kind of think the Conservatives would benefit from, and something where I think Poilievre especially has potential to resonate, is think about the kinds of people that live in these kind of suburban ridings in Toronto, where, like, realistically, they're going to have to have some breakthroughs if they're ever going to form government again. The suburbs of Toronto are the most kind of diverse place, probably maybe one of the most diverse places in the world. And I don't just mean in terms of kind of like different immigrant communities. I mean in terms of like class background as well, right? The idea that there's a single kind of suburban voter is silly, right? There are rich suburban people, there are poor suburban people, there are younger suburban people, there are older suburban people, and the idea that all these people will have the exact same kind of, like, there's a way to kind of please all those people as if they have kind of the same priorities and preferences. It's kind of, it's never going to happen. And the Conservatives are never, too often it feels like Conservatives, they either don't want to expand the base at all, or they want to be liked by everyone. They don't need to be liked by everyone, right? You're never going to please everyone. So what I think they need to do is be looking at the kinds of people I'm talking about, this kind of younger, more millennial, not entirely millennial, but more millennial, younger group of people that live in places like the GTA. Figure out the kinds of things that motivate those kinds of voters, and tap into that. And I think what people will be shocked to learn is that people whenever I go to places like I was in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and I was in a place I was in Vaughan, it's like northern GTA, and something that amazes me when you live somewhere like that. I live in Ottawa, and I live downtown Ottawa, so I live in a fairly kind of bougie urban kind of area, and I can walk basically I can walk to the grocery store, I can walk to the gym, so I have a car, but I don't use it all that much. If you live somewhere like Vaughan, you drive everywhere, right? That's just kind of how those places are built. And so if you're going to appeal to people like that, it's funny how, as much as kind of urban trendy people think that suburbs are full of people like them, in many ways, like people that live in kind of car oriented suburbs, places like that, they live different lives to kind of urban people, urban progressives especially, right? And I think Conservatives, if they actually tried to kind of figure out a message that can resonate specifically with those kinds of people, I don't actually think that should be that difficult. I think kind of small C conservative values should appeal to those people quite easily. It's just a matter of kind of selling that, getting through to those people and actually selling them that.
Well, and getting in front of the message so that you're presenting yourself to the Canadian public and not letting the Liberals define you. And, it's interesting because the type of coalition that you talked about, look back at the 2011 electoral map, and you'll see that Stephen Harper, the GTA is all blue. It's really remarkable how many of those seats went to the Conservatives in 2011. So I know so many people say, look, the Harper Coalition's dead and you can't rerun on something that you used a decade ago, but you're clearly channeling something that was in that platform, the idea of simplistic policies that appeal and actually help people in those parts of the country. I think is great advice. Ben, I want to sort of switch gears here because you mentioned that you're doing your PhD and you're studying the Westminster system of government. I get so many people emailing me and messaging me asking how it's possible for the type of sort of power grab or solidification, coalition, whatever you want to call it, that we saw between the NDP and the Trudeau Liberals. People ask, isn't our system set up to sort of protect against these post-election jockeying of coalitions? But you're sort of the expert on this topic, so I want to get your thoughts on that, and maybe just more broadly, whether you think it's a good strategy, what Trudeau and Singh have done here.
Yeah, I'm going to be the kind of the pedant here that kind of pleases no one with an answer. But um, yeah, I don't, like, this so much of the kind of silly online discussion over this is, someone's calling it a coalition, and then the Aaron Wares of the world saying, well, that's not the correct word, and then that kind of like back and forth over terms. I think this is probably very, if the conservatives are publicly, as they should, criticizing the agreement. They probably stand to benefit from this agreement in a couple of years, given who they can now run against. Technically, what's actually being what's been agreed here is what's called a confidence and supply agreement, which is a fairly kind of common practice in Westminster systems. There's nothing technically so both parties have agreed to this confidence and supply agreement. It's not formal legislation or anything like that. If one of the parties chooses to break it, they're not breaking the law or anything like that. And there's no legislation, doesn't have to be repealed to remove it. So it's more of a kind of a gentleman's agreement that they'll both promise to keep. But it could be, that the NDP could withdraw support at any time if they wanted to. And more likely, the Liberals could, if they see an opportunity, they could just break the agreement. That happened a couple of years ago in British Columbia when the NDP, the then minority NDP government that was backed by the Greens, but had basically one of these agreements with the Green Party, and just basically, I might be getting some of the details on this slightly wrong, but they basically, broke the agreement, kind of betrayed the Greens almost, and then they won a majority. So, this doesn't guarantee that the government lasts till 2025. But I have to say, the people I'm most surprised by, the move makes sense for the Liberals because it basically just gives them close to a free hand as they're going to get in this parliament, right? It allows them to avoid scrutiny. The place to really watch where how this is going to shake out is going to be in the committees. If you go and read the actual agreement that they published publicly, they have a mention of the how this is going to work in terms of committee work. And there's some very kind of vague language in there about both parties will agree to not have any kind of unnecessary obstructions in committees. But the Liberals have not got a good track record of respecting committee work. So, they'll probably just use this as an excuse to kind of sideswipe any kind of like serious scrutiny in committees, which worries me a bit. But in terms of what the NDP gained from this, I just don't. Technically they'll gain some of their policy priorities, pharmacare, dental care, all this kind of stuff. But there's nothing to actually force Liberals to do this. If I was betting, I don't think we'll actually have dental care or pharmacare 2 years from now, just based on how the Liberal government tends to operate. We'll have some sort of promise to have it down the road. We'll have like a white paper or something. But the NDP are the party that I just don't understand. The traditional kind of self-understanding of the NDP has been the conscience of Parliament. Whether I'm not a member of the NDP, but they were traditionally thought of themselves as kind of the principled conscience in Parliament that held the government to account. This is just kind of a betrayal of that almost, right? Singh, I don't know if Singh, I confess, I think Singh is kind of quite far from the kind of, his politics seem quite different from the politics that, used to define that party 30, 40 years ago, if you ask me. He seems more interested in kind of being, more interested in being recognized by people like AOC in the US, and kind of, playing gay online games and stuff with American progressives, than he actually seems in kind of defending the interests of kind of working class Canadians. So again, I think there's a real, traditionally the Conservatives have done well when the NDP are stronger, right? When it splits the kind of left wing vote. I kind of think there might be an opportunity here for the Conservatives to really try and go after some of those kind of working class votes that might feel kind of increasingly kind of adrift and betrayed by the modern NDP, right? This kind of this working class party that's more of a kind of urban progressive public sector union party now. There's opportunities for the Conservatives there, I think, if they're smart, that they can exploit. And just one more quick thing before just to go back to something for a second. I think there's something to this this idea that the Harper Coalition, the Harper recipe can't just be redone, right? Times have changed, and I think that's definitely true. My point about kind of thinking about the suburbs as themselves very diverse places in all sorts of ways is that you could still rebuild that kind of Harper Coalition, so to speak, in terms of kind of the seats that you're winning. But you might be able to, I think the path for the Conservatives to do that, especially under someone like Poilievre, it might be with different people, right? It doesn't, you can win those ridings and win them in very different ways. And that's so instead of thinking of because if I have a criticism of maybe someone like Scheer, Scheer's in the 2019 election, that really did feel like a kind of rehash of Harperism, right? It didn't really feel like there'd been kind of much new thinking or fresh ideas plugged in there. I think you can still kind of keep the broad kind of template for where you need to win, and then infuse it with kind of new ideas, new efforts to reach different people that might not have been persuadable or reachable 10, 15 years ago. The world's changed a lot in the last 10 years, 5 years, let alone 10 years, right? So, I think to bring it back to the question of the NDP and Liberal agreement, I think I think if the Conservatives play their hand right here, there might be some real opportunities for them. But it requires them playing their hand right to do that. So we'll see.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you that the pact or the agreement is a good thing for the Conservatives in a number of ways. It also gives them more time, because I know during the 2021 election, Justin Trudeau said that in minority government, this only tend to last 18 months or so. And so there was sort of this imperative, okay, we need to be ready for the next election. It could happen as soon as late 2022. Well, this sort of it says, okay, Conservatives, you can take your time in selecting the right leader, giving that leader time to sort of set the stage with your agenda. Just final question for you, because I don't mean to pick on Aaron O'Toole. I think he had a tough job that he was tasked with. One of the things early on he said was that he really did want to appeal to those working class voters, and that he wanted that to be like, I remember in an early interview, he was asked if what he thought about the comparisons with him to Trump, because obviously, like you said, they're kind of lazy, but they're always going to come for any conservative leader. And he didn't push that away. He actually said, look, there's a lot of things that Trump did that I want to replicate, something along those lines. Whereas with his the way that he ran and his policies and his set of priorities, I didn't see much that really did appeal to the working class. So I'm wondering if you could provide some suggestions in terms of ideas, policies, things that Conservatives can do or say to attract and keep more of these people that are disaffected by Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, who don't feel like they have a home in the modern NDP. I don't even know, just as an aside, I don't know if the NDP is really going to survive. I mean, at this point, it seems like so many of the priorities that they have are mirrored with the Liberals. It seems almost redundant to have two parties now. I see this as an outsider, so I don't know if there's, I'm not speaking as an NDP member or voter. I've never been part of that party, but I can't imagine really what the purpose of having two. But yeah, if you could maybe comment on the future of the NDP, and then also comment on what you think Conservatives can do to capture this voting bloc.
Yeah, sure. I agree. I don't. I'm not, like I say, I'm not a member of the NDP. I don't understand what their kind of the reason for their existence is anymore. Sooner or later, you would think that that's things that cannot go on forever don't go on forever, and so one suspects sooner or later that something will happen there with them that will force them to kind of figure out who they are. I don't think it's true that they don't have a constituency anymore. I think they do. The problem is that constituency is just not. The NDP are more than anything else now a kind of party of kind of very urban, very progressive, culturally very radical people, right? And there's a constituency for that in certain places. Those are the kinds of people I think that the NDP that dominate kind of, how the NDP think, and who tends to vote for them now. So I suspect they can survive as kind of whatever you want to call that kind of party now. But like you say, in many ways that makes them not all that different from the kind of modern Liberal Party. In terms of kind of how I think the Conservatives can kind of capitalize on some of this, I think there's a couple of things. So I'll put in a defense here for Aaron O'Toole for a second. I think some of the moves he made, especially early on in his just after he got elected, were in the kinds of directions we're talking about here, and I think they were good. I think the problem with O'Toole was that by the end of it, he put on so many different masks and faces and costumes to see if any of them would stick, right? Because he tried that one, he tried a couple other ones. I think again, it goes back to that kind of authenticity problem. But I do think he was onto something with that. And I would still, during the election, I wrote positively about the Conservative Party's platform they put out. I didn't like everything in it, and there was plenty of stuff I would have changed with it. But I actually thought there was an attempt to do some kind of original, new stuff in that platform, especially around kind of working class and labor stuff. Some of the stuff that they championed around, some of the stuff to do with some of the stuff around unions, not all of it. Some of the stuff around unions I think was quite interesting. Certainly wouldn't have pleased everyone in the party. He didn't, but I think there was stuff to work with there. One place where I think federal Conservatives could look is that, and there would be a role for the feds in some of this, is to go and look at some of the work that Ontario, the Minister of, I forget his exact title, but the Minister of Labour in Ontario, Monty McNaughton, he's really managing to he's carving out a space right now on some of this stuff. He's putting, it's obviously there's jurisdictional issues here, so the feds, they don't control kind of skills training and stuff like that all that much. But McNaughton's done a lot of really, really good stuff around skilled trades, around reforming colleges to make them more kind of suited for that kind of stuff. They've done some good stuff recently on kind of like gig work, the future of work and the gig economy. And I think that is exactly the kind of, when I say that the Conservatives need to be reaching kind of new people, younger people, gig work, so to speak, I think is, for lots of people, that is the future. And there's downsides to that and there's good sides to that, right? I don't think it's all bad. It means you get to, some people really like it because, they can, jobs where they kind of get to choose their own hours. They can work 100 hours one week and then 10 hours the next if they need to do something else. So I think some people kind of like the kind of flexibility that comes with that kind of work. But the biggest challenge for gig work, I think, is the kind of precarity of it, right? There's no kind of it's harder to have kind of stability in that kind of work. It's harder to build kind of like long-term plans. So some of the stuff that McNaughton's been doing around just kind of tweaking kind of social security and stuff like that to make it a bit more kind of welcoming to gig work. I think there's good stuff to be done there. And obviously, there's jurisdictional issues here about what the feds can do, but there's definitely opportunities down there. And so federally, I think looking to kind of the work that McNaughton is doing, it would be one good thing they could do. But if there's a bigger kind of, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about some of the Brexit stuff. Parts of what this is going to take is going to be putting kind of, like I say, flesh on the bones, like a substantive policy agenda that actually helps the kinds of people that you're trying to target in real material ways. But a bigger picture, part of this picture is a broader kind of cultural questions and cultural shifts. So much of what I think is actually driving some of these shifts is there's an economic and kind of like a material story you can tell yourself about it. But there's also the other side to the story is a kind of cultural story about the kinds of the changing values of kind of cultural elites versus kind of ordinary people. And that is where I actually think there are some real opportunities for the Conservatives. We've seen the Liberals and the NDP have both gone this direction, right? But there's a real kind of vacuum right now that the Conservatives should fill on kind of it would get painted by kind of like mainstream media as kind of like culture war, culture warrior, cultural conservatism. But what I would actually say is like a very moderate kind of mainstream cultural conservatism that I think actually is a kind of the kinds of cultural values that are shared by most, like this majority of Canadians at least. I think about the kind of what happened with the flag last year, right? We had the flag at half mast for like 6 months, just ludicrous, right? Um, and we basically got into that mess because the Liberals did like what was initially like a nice gesture, sure, but it was just a performative gesture in the end, right? And they ended up getting themselves into this mess of, well, we can't raise the flag because that means we don't care about racism anymore. It was basically kind of like what it seemed like the kind of trap they got themselves into. Um, I think there's a real opportunity for conservatives to kind of reclaim, become the kind of the patriotic party, become the party of kind of, the party that says, Canada might not be a perfect country, but Canada is a good country and we should be proud of this country, be proud, the fact that people want to come here, the fact that, this is the kind of country where people want to and, should be able to lead and can lead good and free lives. That kind of, it used to be, the party of the flag in some ways used to be the Liberals, right? In so many ways, they owned the flag, they owned all the kind of hallmarks of our national identity, the charter, constitution, healthcare, you name it, right? Like the Liberals kind of owned these kind of symbols of, what it meant to be Canadian. But as cultural elite, as elites kind of move in this kind of increasingly kind of more radical kind of direction culturally, where they reject Canada become, and it's hard. Some of these people think of Canada as a kind of illegitimate, settler colonialist state. That leaves so much kind of cultural space, right, for normal people, that fits kind of what most normal people kind of think about. And that is something I think the Conservatives really need to kind of figure out how to take advantage of. I don't think they do. I don't think they need to become like radical culture warriors, even though that's how they'll get painted if they do anything like this. I think they just need to become kind of the unabashed party of kind of Canadian values, so to speak. And 20 years ago, I don't know if they necessarily would have been able to get away with doing that, because I think the Liberal Party of 20 years ago was much more kind of culturally moderate in that sense. Now I'm not so sure. And so if the Conservatives, it sounds kind of maybe counterintuitive, but I think one way to reach some of these new voters is precisely to become that new. I wrote in a recent National Post column that there's something to this kind of this classic kind of, the Conservatives need to moderate in order to win. I think that's true. The problem is they let all the wrong people define what it means for them to moderate and become moderate on. They need to define for themselves what it means to be moderate. And something like this is a classic, perfect example of what it would mean to be a kind of define, we're the moderate party in your own image, right? We are the party of Canadian values. We're the party of the flag. We're the party that believes in this country. There is so much ground for them to kind of carve out there. And so I'm not a strategist, right? I don't understand the kind of the nitty-gritties of exactly how you would create messaging and how exactly you would go about doing that. But I think that if there was one way to kind of really kind of accelerate some of these shifts and really try and take advantage of them, that would be the route to go down for them.
Well, we have a prime minister who says not just that Canada is a country that was formed on genocide, but he says that Canada is actively committing genocide. He agreed with the 2017 recommendations of the Missing and Murdered Aboriginal Women report, which was a report that was necessary. However, the people who put it together were radically left-wing. Part of their recommendations was that admitting that a genocide is still going on today, and Trudeau said that he agreed with that. So talk about the need for a moderate, just to counter our crazy, insane, woke leftist sort of mindset. And I think that's right. Anecdotally, last year at Canada Day, amidst all of the sort of consternation about Canada and this sort of horrible, irreconcilable past, cancel Canada Day movements, toppling statues, the number of people who were out on the streets on Canada Day celebrating unabashedly, the horns honking all night, the fireworks going on. I don't know what it was like in Ottawa, but in Toronto, it was like an absolute party. And part of that might have been just that people were cooped up from COVID for too long and they were finally able to go out at that time. But really, I saw a big outpouring of sort of Canadian and nationalistic or patriotic impulse there. And then we saw it again during the Freedom Convoy. So I think you're definitely right. I think there's something to that the Liberals have sort of abandoned their traditional kind of base as being the Party of Canada and all these symbols that they themselves brought in, that they're now apparently ashamed of and don't want anything to do with, and can't bring themselves to promote. So I think that's great. I think hopefully, Ben, the Conservatives listen to the advice that you're giving, and appreciate your time today. Appreciate your writing that we can find in the Hub and the National Post. So thank you so much for joining us. That's Ben Woodfinden, and I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show.